All right. Good morning, everybody. And before I start, I really want to thank all of you for joining, and particularly Vic and Katrina for doing all the hard work behind this conference and all the wonderful thinking this entire group has been doing around equity, and also having the openness of mind to expand your thinking beyond and allowing other forms of equity. And it's really a pleasure to be a part of you and to listen to you and to learn from you. As Vic said, I am working with animal-human interfaces, particular interest in wildlife-human interfaces, building resilience and adaptability and health. I do feel that equity is a major component of that and something that's very much missed in the current dialogue. But I am by no means an expert. It's new to me. I'm, just navigating through it as well. I don't think there really are any experts through it, but I think it's something that's highly necessary if we're going to heal our relationship with the planet in the impending challenges of climate change. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that today, but before I start, I would like to first acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people in Nanaimo, the traditional territories of the Nanaimo First Nations. Thank you. So today I will talk to you a little bit about some of the current narratives of climate change, particularly in relation to health. And then I'll stretch that in terms of animal health beyond the common narratives that we do see. And then I'll suggest some ways that we could potentially address this gap and ask you to think about those. So before I start, I just want to tell you a little bit of a story. I was out the other day, very rainy morning, drizzly morning with my pup, and we were out in the woods, and I took this picture, and I'm wondering, what do you see here? We sat there for about 15 minutes, and Theo, his name is, was looking at these guys here, these deer in the background, and they literally just stood there for about 15 minutes, completely unafraid, not even flinching at the fact that there's this dog and human watching them. And this is pretty common here on Vancouver Island and throughout BC. And to me, this is, a lot of people find this endearing and sweet, but to me, it represents a major issue and an issue with equity, because what happens is that it draws in guys like this. And deer are a big predator or a big prey species for cougar, and we're finding more and more cougar coming into our communities as their habitat is destroyed and they're brought into human communities by habituated prey species such as deer. And unfortunately, they become the unfortunate victims of vilification and violence after a period of time when they're considered a nuisance. So these are just some of the impacts of climate change that I see. So climate change and life in the 21st centuries, what are the images that we see? The public generally sees images like this: flooding, drought, major heat waves, wildfires, calamities such as earthquakes. It's a story of death, doom, and destruction for the most part, and creates significant apathy in the general population about what to do, and often puts people's head in the sand. So it's a pretty not so fun outlook for us in the future. And the conversations around climate change and health have been increasing in volume. We recognize that heat waves and water quality impacts and allergens and changes in vector ecology all have impacts on human health on a disease basis. And the conversation is increasing in volume around this in health policy. But even more, sorry, I've got a cat that insists on getting involved in the conversation here. But even more, some of the new conversations coming up, which are really lovely to see, are switching from a death, doom, and destruction narrative to health promotion, and looking at asset-based ways to protect communities, to build resilience and adaptability in health, and particularly introducing equity into the equation, which is really a wonderful thing to see. But it is still primarily focused on humans, and the impacts of climate change on humans and their health. And what about the conversations of climate change in relation to animals? Quite simply put, it's often relegated to zoonotic diseases. And I'm emphasizing here that this is specifically talking about the climate change impacts on animal from a health perspective, not from a greater population dynamic perspective. So what are zoonoses and how prevalent are they? Well, depending on the literature you look at, the figures vary, but they say 60 to 2/3 to 3/4 of our infectious diseases in humans come from animals. These are, this is not a new story. This is a story that has existed for millennia, as long as humans have interacted with animals. In fact, a bear could turn around and tell us that 80% of a bear's diseases come from other creatures. So it really depends on the lens that you take. But they are, we share a world with animals. So it's a natural behavior for pathogens to be able to adapt to new hosts. It increases pathogen survival. So having zoonoses is not something new. It's not something different. Some of the ones that you might recognize on this list that are shared among humans, wildlife, livestock, and domestic animals: Ebola, COVID, rabies, avian influenza, E. coli, salmonella, Lyme disease, lepto, parasites, gastrointestinal parasites, toxoplasmosis, Bartonella campi, trips, and tularemia and dengue. And a lot of these we even see in British Columbia, and they're worldwide, very successful creatures. But what has changed over the past 20 years? Well, emerging diseases from spillover events from animals to humans have increased in incidence in the past 20 years. So although this figure could be a little bit skewed in the sense that we've been able to detect more viruses because of our technology, emerging infectious diseases and re-emerging infectious diseases are a main topic in epidemiological circles, where some epidemiologists are now saying we're in a third epidemiological transition, where the greatest threat to human health is emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases from animal-human interfaces. And why is this happening? Well, simply put, it's because of an intensification of activity between animals and humans. So our interfaces are becoming closer and they're becoming more stressed, mainly a result of human activity, the commodification of animals, wildlife trade, and global travel of animals, intensification of agriculture, habitat loss, which is displacing wildlife into new regions, having them interact with different species, immunologically naive species, or even into human territories. These are now common sites where wildlife are becoming habituated to people. They're losing their fear of people, which is not healthy. They're discovering that it's much easier to get food and different resources when they come closer to people, which impacts their physical health, but also can create quote unquote problem animals. But really, a lot of this is these animals are stressed. If you were losing your home and didn't have enough food and water, you would be stressed too. And stress has, in the human literature, medical literature, has quite close connection with vulnerability to disease. It's no different in animal species. So they have similar physiologies. Stress hormones rise, increases vulnerability to disease as the immune system is suppressed, which will increase pathogen shedding, also increase pathogen multiplication, which increases the chance of mutation and spillover into other naive populations. So it's not that animals are bags of disease or pathogens. We all carry pathogens, and but it's a big part of it is just stress-induced shedding. And we are not naive to this in BC as well. The conversation is about climate change and health when it comes to animals is dominated by vector-borne diseases and food and waterborne diseases, but vector-borne diseases when it comes to wildlife. And this is, you'll hear stories about Lyme disease primarily, but there's other diseases such as Ehrlichia, Babesia, Anaplasma that are being brought in from warmer temperatures carried by tick vectors. So a lot of tick-borne diseases as climate changes, temperatures increase, and tick ranges are moving further northward. But there are other dynamics as well. And this is, we could talk about this for a very long time, but I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. And there's plenty of other mechanisms or dynamics that do increase the transmission of disease. One is domestic animal ownership and changing migratory patterns. I've lump these into sort of one just to be able to talk about toxoplasma, which is a very successful parasite that usually cycles between cats and rodents. Free roaming cats are one of the definitive hosts for toxoplasma. So a big narrative in the veterinary clinical world is to encourage owners to keep cats indoors. Cats poop outside and they release millions of eggs into the environment, which are picked up by rodents or sometimes aberrant hosts. And these aberrant hosts are often wildlife that then have the chance to spread disease, spread toxoplasma to other environments. Now, toxoplasma, you might have heard of it as the parasite that causes abortions in women, but it does a lot more than that. It also can migrate to human brains, not just human brains, but other animals as well, and is actually implicated in being an underlying driver in many mental health conditions and suicides. So it has far-reaching effects, and with changing migratory patterns in bird and marine mammals, toxoplasmosis is now reaching the far north and is representing a major issue in food security for the circumpolar north. So we found toxoplasma in beluga whales, which are a major food source for many of the indigenous cultures up north. Loss of habitat and overlapping niches, so animals coming in closer contact with us. Rabies is not just a bat thing in British Columbia. The Arctic fox is a major reservoir up north, and changing ranges have brought, and overlapping ranges have brought rabies in contact with, or Arctic fox in contact with red fox, and red fox have a very wide range, including northern BC. Rabies, the rabies from the Arctic foxes has jumped into red foxes, which have the capacity to travel down south. Now, this is not something that we might see in lower latitudes in British Columbia, but certainly I want to emphasize here that a lot of these zoonoses that are not common narratives down in lower latitudes have major implications in remote and rural communities where in northern BC, where where people live much more closely with animals and have wildlife coming into their communities much more frequently. So just as so rabies in communities up north represents a major issue. Now, I was going to talk about COVID, but I think for the interests of time, because this is just another big story, I'll probably just skip this over, but I'm happy to talk about some of the animal health implications with COVID later if people are interested. Now, so the major narrative around climate change and animal health is about zoonoses. And I want to now ask you to stretch out a little bit and think about how this focus is limited. First of all, it takes a symptomatic approach. It's still a narrative of death, doom, and destruction. It's still, zoonoses are a symptom. They're not a root cause. They're not a root cause of ill health. They're a symptom of poor health. So focusing simply on zoonoses is like taking a fire engine approach. We need to look further upstream to see why are we getting more zoonoses? Why are we seeing more spillover events? Second of all, it's anthropocentric. It's still thinking about health in the context of how it affects humans, rather than taking the interrelational approach where we recognize that we're just part of a greater integrated life force. Third of all, and this is a big concern certainly in the zoonotic disease community, is that it's fear generating. The more we talk about zoonoses and focus on zoonoses, the general public does start getting fearful towards animals. In fact, when COVID first broke out and there was reports about COVID potentially being in cats, we were presented in clinics with quite a few people who wanted to euthanize their cats. It's pretty tragic to see. And just like I showed you, the cougar entering communities, people are starting to get a significant fear over animals being around them. Oops. So how is it more than just about zoonoses? Now, these are pictures of death, doom, and destruction, but they're real. Now, these are creatures who share our climate, and they're also losing their homes because of wildfires, droughts, food insecurity, and starving to death. They're highly sensitive to toxins and changes in the environment around them, where we're seeing mass die-offs of marine creatures. They're sustaining injuries and dying because of plastics in the ocean, overcrowding. These are pictures of walruses in the far north in Siberia. And then just human displacement because of climate change and food insecurity leaves a lot of domestic animals homeless too when people leave and they just can't take care of their animals. And this is no different in BC. These are probably pictures that are more familiar to you. Coyotes in Vancouver, wolves denning among houses in Prince Rupert, marine mammals washing up on beaches for unknown causes, plastics killing some of our endangered species like the red squirrel. Now, these are all disturbing images. And to me, when I look at these, it really raises a lot of emotion. And these emotions are beyond how it affects me or humans. It's just emotions for that death and destruction that we're seeing around us. And these are, I think, important emotions to sit with. And the majority of people tend to turn off the TV, turn away. But I think it's important to think about why you are so disturbed by images. I don't think there's anybody who's not disturbed by it, and think about why you're disturbed by something like this, and when you dig into that, you might start finding where the connection for you between animals and humans lie. Not to say to dwell on it, but to recognize it. Now, I came across this yesterday, actually. Someone sent this to me, and this comes from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. I'd like to read parts of it out loud, if that's okay. So Elder Reg Crowshoe told the commission that Indigenous people's worldviews, oral history, traditions, and practices have much to teach us about how to establish respectful relationships among people and with the land and all living things. Learning how to live together in a good way happens through sharing stories and practicing reconciliation in our everyday lives. As Elder Crowshoe explained further, reconciliation requires talking, but our conversations must be broader than the Canada's conventional approaches. Reconciliation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians from an Aboriginal perspective also requires reconciliation with the natural world. If human beings resolve problems between themselves, but continue to destroy the natural world, then reconciliation remains incomplete. I love that part. This is a perspective that we as commissioners have repeatedly heard, that reconciliation will never occur unless we also reconcile with the earth. Mi'kmaq and other Indigenous laws stress that humans must journey through life in conversation and negotiation with all of creation. Reciprocity and mutual respect help sustain our survival. So if this is a gap, which I think it is, the way of framing animal health from a logic and brain perspective to connecting it with what we feel in our hearts, how can we address it? Again, I am no expert and I don't know. I've been raised in a Western frame of knowledge, which I think is extremely valuable, but I think has a lot of gaps and can sense it in my gut that there's some problems with it. And but I do think that there's other knowledge systems and worldviews. And I really like the way that Vic and Katrina put it yesterday. It's not just combining, but it's creating synergy and into harmony. So I think that's a major step that we can take. The other is as a tool, health promotion theory, you know, and asset-based approaches, and applying those to animal health. And thirdly, this group is more the expert in equity than I am, but expanding the umbrella of equity to other species that are non-human. So in all of our work. So where is equity in the conversation about animal health? It does. Equity to a greater or lesser form is alive in many of the conversations of interdisciplinary health, One Health, planetary health, eco health, global health. But really, it does come alive in a lot of Indigenous forms of knowing around the world. So again, synergizing and harmonizing our ways of knowing requires a lot of humility, obviously, and debunking of our own perceptions that are deeply embedded in us. The second thing, health promotion and strength-based approaches to animal health, rather than taking a constant disease perspective or prevention of disease, or handling of diseases rather, looking at health promotion to build resilience and adaptability in animal health in the face of climate change. And then finally, equity. This is a shared climate emergency, and we have shared inequities. So as much as humans feel it, so do the animals. But you have some excellent tools, this group does, So what I ask you is, can these tools be applied to animal health in your work and life? Is there places that animals that you might not be aware of factor into your work and life, and how can you put equity, how can you put an equity framing onto the way that you approach that? So looking at equity beyond the human and imagining a different relationship between animals and humans into a greater interrelationship. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much,